What looked like a treat turned out to be a trap. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Let me know where you're watching from. Drop it in the comments below. I always love reading your thoughts. It was just past 10 o'clock on a damp Tuesday morning when the front doorbell rang and my routine 1 cup of black coffee, 3 smart remarks to Fritz, and a half-finished crossword was rudely interrupted. I had already guessed it wouldn't be a delivery man or a lost tourist. When someone rings the bell at the brownstone before noon, it usually means one of 2 things. Trouble is coming in a shiny wrapper, or Wolfe will end up fuming over an interruption to his orchid schedule. Or both. I set the crossword aside, dusted my lapel, and opened the door. She stood there with an oversized hat that probably had a name, a trench coat that wasn't quite sure whether it was for rain or style, and a red lacquered biscuit tin cradled in her arms like it contained her late grandmother's ashes, which, given the way people act these days, wasn't outside the realm of possibility. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked. Her voice was crisp, with that practiced politeness that usually means boarding schools and family lawyers. "That's me. Archie. Goodwin, confidential secretary to Nero Wolfe, who, as it happens, is home and vertical barely. Come in." She stepped across the threshold like she was afraid to scuff the parquet. I took her coat, offered her a seat in the front room, and made a mental note. She wasn't nervous, just tense. Big difference. Nervous people sweat and fidget. Tense people tighten around a secret like it's about to be auctioned off. "Your name, for the record?" "Miranda Vale. I was referred by Mr. Kramer, Inspector Kramer." That got my attention. Anyone Kramer sends our way usually falls into the category of reluctant but important, or reluctantly important. "And the 10? I asked, nodding toward the lacquered red curiosity resting in her lap like a royal relic. She pressed her lips together, then opened the latch with slow, careful fingers. Inside was a neat row of shortbread biscuits, delicately stacked and clearly homemade, not store-bought. And nestled between the top layer and the lid was a single folded piece of ivory stationery. "This arrived at my home this morning by courier," she said. "It was left with no return address. The biscuits are a family recipe. I would know them anywhere. But the handwriting on the note isn't mine. It's my sister's. Only she's been dead for 3 years. I didn't crack. Wise. Wolfe would have, but that's why I handled the introductions. Instead, I took the note and gave it a once-over. The handwriting was old-fashioned, flowing, and unmistakably feminine. It said, 'You were wrong. The recipe wasn't the only thing she kept from you. M.' There was no signature beyond the M, no date, and no explanation of who she might be. But Miranda's face had paled just enough to suggest she had a few theories, and didn't like any of them. "Miss Vale," I said, folding the note carefully, "do you have reason to believe this is more than just an unpleasant prank?" She gave a sharp little nod. "Yes, because the tin itself that was hidden. It went missing after the funeral. No one should have had access to it." "Who exactly is no one?" "My sister's business partner. My cousin." "And?" Her eyes flicked down at the tin. "My late sister's husband." "Charming trio." She didn't smile. "Wait here," I told her. "If you're lucky, Wolfe hasn't yet finished browbeating Fritz over breakfast, and might still be receptive to women-bearing biscuits." I left her seated and walked back to the office. Wolfe was at his desk, not reading, which meant he was thinking. He looked up as I entered, one brow lifting in lazy judgment. "A client," I said, "bearing baked goods and an unsolvable mystery involving a biscuit tin, a dead sister, and a note that should be impossible." "That sounds absurd," he said. "She was referred by Inspector Kramer." He grunted. I added the clincher. "She believes the tin contains more than just cookies. Possibly a message from the grave, or something someone wants to keep buried." He stared at me for a full beat. Then, "Bring her in." I returned with Miranda Vale in tow, and Wolfe gave her a glance that would have curled a lesser woman's socks. She didn't flinch. That was to her credit. She stood quietly just inside the room, the biscuit tin still in hand, like she was waiting to be called on by a headmaster. I shut the door behind her. Wolfe grunted again, his version of a greeting, and gestured with 2 fingers at the red leather chair across from his desk. "Sit," he said, "and explain concisely." Miranda sat, crossing her legs and resting the tin on her lap. "3 years ago, my sister Margot died. It was officially ruled as suicide. Pills, but I never believed that. She was troubled, yes, but not desperate." "Not that way. You reported your suspicions at the time?" Wolfe asked. I tried. Inspector Kramer heard me out and then explained kindly that suspicion isn't proof. There was no note, no sign of struggle, no clear motive for anyone to want her dead. Just an overdose and a locked bathroom door. You say she was troubled. Why? Miranda hesitated, then said Margot ran a small food business with a partner, Sylvia. Donnell. They made high-end preserves and baked goods. Their shortbread was especially popular. They called themselves the Biscuit Sisters, even though they weren't related. Margot developed the recipes. Sylvia managed the marketing. Things were good until about 6 months before Margot died. I don't know what happened exactly, but she started drinking more, missing calls, avoiding me. When I asked, she said it was business stress, but she was afraid. I could tell. Wolfe pressed his fingertips together. "And the husband?" "Clay Harwell, a charming parasite. They married too fast, and it didn't last. They separated 2 months before. She died. He's now living off his next unfortunate wife, last I heard." I cut in. "So this tin, why is it important?" Miranda opened it again, carefully. This tin sat on Margot's kitchen shelf. It was always there. When she died, it wasn't among her things. I assumed someone had taken it, Clay, maybe. Or Sylvia. I didn't think much of it until this morning. And now, the handwriting on the note is Margot's, but the reference, it's cryptic. And if someone is pretending to be her, why send it now? Wolfe exhaled heavily. A moment. He extended his hand, and I passed him the note. He examined it with a squint, sniffed once at the stationery, yes, really, and then set it down on the blotter, like it might offend him further if it stayed in his fingers. The implication, Wood said, is that Margot possessed something, an object, a document, or knowledge hidden from Miss Vale, and someone has now unearthed it, or wants her to believe it's been unearthed, I added. This could be a shake-up, a prod to get her asking questions. Yes, Wolfe said, and someone with much to lose from such questions. Miranda's eyes flicked from Wolfe to me. Then you'll help? That depends, Wolfe said. Do you want to know the truth, Miss Vale? Regardless of how uncomfortable or compromising it may be? She nodded, her jaw set. I do. Then I'll require names. You said 3 people had access to the tin. Sylvia Darnell, Clay Harwell, and our cousin Gareth Vale. He handled Margot's estate, what little there was. Occupation? He's a lawyer, family firm. Vale, Linney, and Keats. Wolfe waved a hand. Mr. Goodwin will arrange interviews. You are to remain available and refrain from contacting any of the individuals involved until I instruct otherwise. If anyone approaches you, notify Mr. Goodwin immediately. That will be all. Miranda stood. I understand, and thank you. I walked her to the door and caught a whiff of lavender as she passed. A detail, not a flourish. She wasn't wearing perfume. That scent came from the tin. Maybe from the biscuits themselves. Odd for a shortbread. Back in the office, Wolfe had closed his eyes. Phewie, the baked goods are a distraction. What matters is the message. I figured you'd say that. Her description of her sister's decline interests me. Sudden, severe, and conveniently timed to an alleged suicide. Which leaves U.S. with 3 suspects and 1 tin-shaped question mark. Begin with Sylvia Darnell, Wolfe said. She is closest to the core. Observe her reaction to the note, but do not disclose its contents. Got it. I called Lily Rowan to reschedule dinner again and pulled my coat off the rack. 40 minutes later, I was in a cramped storefront bakery in Soho with the words Sisters Preserve etched in curly script on the window. Inside was a display case full of fig jam, rosemary crackers, and exactly 0 customers. A slim woman behind the counter looked up as I walked in, her smile slipping the moment. I said Margot Vale's name. Couldn't see. Small, maybe food. Or not. I relayed the details to Wolfe, who nodded once and said, They're coordinating. Or bargaining. Either way, we must interrupt the rhythm. I raised an eyebrow. You want to call in the rest? Of the cavalry? Wolfe's voice was quiet and even. Bring Saul in. And Fred. Tell them we're laying a trap. The bait, of course, is the tin. I gave Fred Durkin the heads-up just before lunch. He was eating a pastrami on rye and muttered. Something about indigestion being part of the job. Saul Panzer didn't say a word. He never does when he's dialed in. I told them both to be at the Brownstone at 4 o'clock sharp. Wolfe wanted a war council, or as close to one as he allows that doesn't involve bourbon, cigars, and betrayal. By the time they arrived, Fritz had already cleared the lunch dishes and retreated to his sanctuary of sauces and simmering pans. I led the 2 operatives into the office. Wolfe was seated behind his desk like a monarch on a calorie-controlled throne. The biscuit tin sat on the edge of the desk, glinting under the desk lamp like it might grow legs and tell us the truth. Gentlemen, Wolfe began without preamble. The circumstances are as follows. 3 years ago, a woman named Margot Vale allegedly took her own life. Yesterday, her sister received this object. He tapped the tin with a thick finger, accompanied by a note in Margot's hand, suggesting secrets remain. The tin contains biscuits, made from Margot's original recipe, with a subtle addition of lavender. The note and the recipe both appear authentic, but the delivery method was untraceable. That cannot be coincidence. Fred looked at Saul. Saul looked at Wolfe. This is the play, I said. We're not just sniffing around a cold case. Somebody wants Wolfe involved, maybe to solve it, maybe to steer him wrong. Wolfe nodded once. We must identify who stands to gain. Mr. Panzer, I want you to focus on Miss Sylvia Darnell. Follow her movements. Observe who she speaks with and where. No engagement, just eyes. Saul nodded. Double quotes, Mr. Durkin. You will handle Mr. Clay Harwell. Tail him. Be discreet but invasive. Learn his patterns. Report anything unusual. Fred gave a grunt of assent. Meanwhile, Wolfe said, I will conduct my investigation from here. The bait is set. We must now see who circles. He turned. To me, Archie, Miss Vale is to be invited back here this evening, 8 o'clock. Tell her it's important. I want to test her reaction to the full implications of the note. She's already shown she's game, Wolfe. Yes, but has she shown she's truthful? That line stayed with me while I made the call. Miranda answered on the first ring like she'd been waiting. When I gave her the invitation, she accepted. Without hesitation, no questions. No delay. Should I bring the tin? She asked. No, I said. It's staying under lock and key. You're the one we need. By the time 8 rolled around, the clouds had thickened over Manhattan like a god had taken up watercolor. Rain tapped lightly at the windows as Miranda stepped back into the brownstone. This time she looked more collected, sleek black coat, hair pinned back, a look that said she was ready for answers or a fight. Whichever came first, Wolfe barely glanced up as she entered the office. Sit, Miss Vale, he said. She did. Number. Hesitation. She looked from me to the desk, saw the tin still there, and gave a tight nod. You found something? Not yet, Wolfe said, but we are closing in. He reached for the note again and read it aloud, slowly. You were wrong. The recipe wasn't the only thing she kept from you. Then he looked at her. What did she keep from you? Miss Vale, I told you, she said quietly. I don't know. I think you do, Wolfe said. Not the object, perhaps, but the category. Was it a disagreement, a betrayal, a secret from your past? She didn't flinch, but her hands clenched on her lap. We weren't close in the final year, she admitted. We spoke less. She started pushing me away. Why? I told her to leave Clay. Wolfe raised his brows. She resented the advice? No, she said, and her voice caught slightly. She took it. That was the problem. Explain. Miranda drew in a breath. Margot had changed. Clay isolated her. Then the business started struggling. She leaned on me emotionally, financially. I offered to buy into it, to stabilize things. But she refused. Sighed Sylvia would never agree. I got angry. I said things. That she was choosing pride over sense, over family. So she pushed you out. Yes, Wolfe closed his eyes, thinking, what if the note is not about guilt, but about absolution or warning? She looked, puzzled. Warning? Indeed. Someone close to Margot wanted this message to emerge now. Someone who fears what you might discover, which means the tin was never lost. It was hidden, and then revealed, I added, to set something in motion. She stared at the tin. You think the note is authentic? I do, Wolfe said, but authenticity does not preclude manipulation. There was a long silence. Then Miranda said, So what's the next step? Before Wolfe could answer, the doorbell rang. I frowned, checked my watch. We weren't expecting anyone. I left the office and answered the door. Standing there in a damp trench coat was Sylvia Darnell. Number. Umbrella. no warning. Just a look like someone who'd come to settle a debt with interest. "I need to see Mr. Wolfe," she said. "Convenient timing," I muttered, stepping aside. I led her into the office, where Miranda stiffened immediately. "Miss Darnell," Wolfe said without standing. "How unexpected. I thought you might be looking into the tin." She said, "I'm here to help." "That," Wolfe murmured, "is suspicious." "I don't care," she snapped. 3 years ago, I made a mistake. I let Margot carry the weight alone. I thought it would pass. It didn't. And now, someone's playing games with her memory. I won't let that stand." Wood steepled his fingers. "What did she keep from Miss Vale?" he asked. "What was the secret?" Sylvia's eyes flicked to Miranda. "I didn't want to be the one to say it." "Say it anyway," Wolfe said. Sylvia exhaled. "Margot had a second ledger, hidden. She tracked private clients, people who paid her under. The table for recipes. Exclusive rights. Even full ownership. Some were minor, others ... not. One of those clients threatened her. Said if she ever disclosed the deal, he'd ruin her. Name? I don't know. But I know Margot gave them one recipe in particular, her signature shortbread. And the tin? That's where she kept the cards she never intended to sell. The originals, if it's resurfaced," she looked at Miranda, "it could destroy someone." Wolfe's voice was low. "That Miss Darnell is exactly the idea." Sylvia Darnell didn't wait to be dismissed. The moment she dropped that little bomb about secret recipe sales and a threatening client, she rose, offered a stiff nod, and let herself out without another word. I didn't try to stop her. Wolfe didn't ask me to. Miranda, still seated across from the desk, looked like someone had just knocked the wind out of her with a velvet-gloved punch. I watched Wolfe as Sylvia's footsteps faded down the hall. His eyes were half closed, and if you didn't know him, you'd assume he was meditating. If you did know him, you'd realize he was rearranging facts like chess pieces. "A secret buyer," I said. "Now we're talking motive, leverage, and maybe a little blackmail." "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "But only if we accept Miss Darnell's story at face value. She had no reason to lie, not this time." "She had every reason," Wolfe corrected, "and a compelling one. If the recipe was sold illicitly, and she benefited from that sale, then the exposure of this fact places her in professional and legal jeopardy. Volunteering the information paints her as a reluctant accomplice, not a conspirator." Miranda shifted uneasily. "Are you saying she's trying to get ahead of it?" "I am saying," Wolfe replied, "that her visit was prompted by pressure, not guilt. Someone has disturbed her equilibrium. I suspect it wasn't just our inquiry." Sylvia Darnell was in her early 40s, stylish in a curated kind of way. Every piece of clothing she wore was meant to look effortless and actually cost a fortune. She invited me into the back office without prompting. "Archie Goodwin, working." "For Nero Wolfe," I said, flashing the credentials. "Yes. Inspector Kramer warned me you might come around," she said, pouring herself a glass of cucumber water. "None offered for me. Then you know this is about Margot." I gathered. "But honestly, Mr. Goodwin, that was 3 years ago. I don't know what else there is to say. Maybe start with the biscuits." That caught her off guard. Her hand twitched just a flicker. "Biscuits, shortbread. Family recipe. You two used to sell them, right?" "Of course." "Before Well, before the business changed, we phased them out. Because? She hesitated. They were labor-intensive. Margot insisted on doing them by hand. She said the texture was ruined by machines. After she died, I couldn't replicate them, so we stopped. And the tin? Red, lacquered, familiar. She went pale, just a little. Then said too quickly, "What about it?" It turned up. That's surprising. She shifted in her chair. Listen, Margot had secrets. I won't pretend she didn't. What if someone's trying to stir things up now? Well, they're playing with ghosts. And ghosts don't like being disturbed. I left with a jar of fig compote I didn't want, and a sense that Sylvia Darnell knew more than she was letting on. Much more. Back at the brownstone, I briefed Wolfe as he watered orchids. He listened, grunted, and said, "She's afraid, but not of ghosts." Of what, then? Of being uncovered. The difference is crucial. He turned a flower pot slightly, his fingers delicate as a surgeon's. We need more. Next stop, Clay Harwell? No, Wolfe said. Gareth Vale. Lawyers are less clever at lying. Begin there. By 9 the next morning I was parked outside the office of Vale, Linney, and Keats, which was tucked neatly into the third floor of a post-war building on East 62nd Street, a location that screamed, "We're respectable, but not rich." The nameplate on the door was polished, but the lobby smelled faintly of mildew and bad coffee, the kind of details Wolfe would register with one sniff and use to judge the whole operation. I do my judging with people, not upholstery. The receptionist, a young man who looked barely old enough to drink legally, asked if I had an appointment. I said yes and added that it wasn't on the books. He blinked, then disappeared down the hall. A moment later, Gareth Vale himself came out, wearing a navy three-piece suit that was a little too crisp and a smile that was trying too hard. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, extending a hand. "You're working for Nero Wolfe, I understand. How? May I help?" "About your cousin Margot," I said, stepping into his office. I'd say this is a social call, but that would be a lie. Gareth's office was the same as the rest of the suite, orderly, inoffensive, and forgettable. Framed law degree from NYU hung behind his desk, and a pair of framed photos on the bookshelf showed him grinning with different dogs. Not kids, not family. Dogs. He gestured to the chair across from him and took his seat. I did what I could to settle Margot's affairs, but the estate was negligible, mostly debt. A few personal effects. Her business interest passed to her partner as stipulated, and her ex-husband, Clay Harwell? Gareth's lips tightened. Wasn't entitled to a penny. Not even a biscuit tin. I let the phrase hang for a beat and saw the tiniest twitch in his left eyebrow. "You know the tin." "Then," I said casually, "I remember it. Red. She kept loose recipes in it, I think. Handwritten cards. It wasn't among the listed items, so I assumed it was discarded or taken before probate." "It's turned up," I said, watching his reaction. "Delivered anonymously to her sister yesterday. With a note." He sat back. "A note?" I pulled out a facsimile of the note Wolfe had made that morning. Not the real deal. Wolfe wasn't about to risk contamination or loss of the original. Gareth took it, studied the cursive, then looked up. "This? Looks like Margot's handwriting." "You're sure?" "I spent enough time reading her grocery lists. Yes." "Then tell me, if she wrote this, when did she write it?" And why? He shook his head. No idea. Though the suggestion in this note, it's troubling. She and Miranda, things weren't always warm. Explain. Gareth leaned forward. Miranda is fiercely protective of Margot's legacy, but she wasn't always involved. Margot kept her at arm's length. Business, personal, she preferred independence. That led to misunderstandings. And you think someone's trying to stir that pot? I think someone's trying to rewrite history. For what reason, I couldn't say. He handed back. The facsimile, his tone flat. Do you still see Clay Harwell or Sylvia Darnell? I asked. Occasionally. I see Clay at fundraisers. He married up again. Sylvia keeps to herself these days. And none of you had access to the tin? He smiled thinly. If I'd had access, I would have burned it. Nothing good ever came out of it. Margot was obsessive about her recipes. Those cards were guarded, like state secrets. But whatever's in that tin now, it's not going to resurrect her. It'll only bring pain. Sometimes pain is the path to truth, I said. He chuckled. And sometimes it's just pain. I left him staring at his bookshelf of pristine law texts and pedigreed pets. Out in the hallway I called Wolfe and filled him in. He was composed, I concluded. Too composed. Mentioned burning the tin a little too easily. Yes, Wolfe said. A man who says he would destroy something of no value is trying to mask curiosity. Return immediately. When I walked into the office, Wolfe was already seated with the biscuit tin, open, on his desk. He had Fritz bring him a single biscuit on a saucer. The untouched shortbread sat like a museum relic beside the note. They smell faintly of lavender, he said without looking at me. Double quotes, yeah. Miranda wasn't wearing perfume, I noticed. Lavender oil is not used in standard shortbread. It can be added, but only deliberately, which raises the question, were these biscuits made from Margot's recipe? You think they're a forgery? No, I think they're bait. He leaned back in his chair, eyes closed. Miss Darnell and Mr. Vale both recognized the tin and note. Both were alarmed by its reappearance, yet neither asked to see the biscuits. Curious, wouldn't you say? I shrugged. Maybe they assumed we wouldn't share. Perhaps, but then there's this. He slid an envelope toward me. Inside was a typed report from Saul Panzer. Last night, Saul checked courier records. No packages were registered for Miranda Vale's address in the past 2 days from any of the major services. UPS, FedEx, local bike couriers, nothing. The delivery method was off book. Hand delivered. Yes, likely someone who knew the building or her schedule, possibly both. I sat down. So whoever sent the tin didn't just want to spook Miranda. They wanted her to bring it here, precisely, which means we were the intended recipients, not she. Wolfe rose a sign of agitation so rare it's practically newsworthy. He moved toward the bookshelf but didn't touch a thing. We must consider the following, he said. 1. Someone recreated Margot's handwriting well enough to deceive her own family. 2. Someone baked her shortbread with the addition of lavender, likely symbolic. 3. Someone wants me involved in the past. And the message? I asked. The something she kept from you? Wolfe turned slowly. That is the lever, and I intend to discover what it moves. Just then the phone rang. I answered. It was Saul. We've got movement, he said, "Clay Harwell was spotted at Sylvia Darnell's bakery this morning. He was there for 15 minutes. They didn't argue, but they didn't look friendly either. She gave him something in a small paper bag. What kind of something?" At that moment the phone rang. I crossed the room and answered. "Fred," came the voice. "Just checking in. Thought you'd want to know Clay Harwell. Had a visitor about an hour ago. Guy in a tan overcoat. No umbrella. Came out of Sylvia. Darnell's building. They met on the stoop. Had words. Not friendly ones. Did Harwell take anything from him?" "Yup. Envelope. Flat. Not thick. They didn't go inside. It was a hand-off. The guy left fast." "You follow him?" "I did. He got in a cab. I'm still tailing." "Good. Stay on it. Report in the moment he does anything interesting." I hung up and filled Wolfe in. He was unimpressed. "Envelope," he muttered. "Likely a document, possibly the missing ledger Miss Darnell alluded to. Which means she's not just talking, she's moving pieces." "Exactly. And that makes her dangerous." Miranda stood. "What now?" "You've got Saul tailing Sylvia, Fred watching Clay. What about Gareth?" Wolfe didn't look at her. "Mr. Vale is a patient man. If he is involved, he will act only when provoked. Therefore we shall provoke him." I raised a brow. "How?" Wolfe turned to me. "You will pay him a visit tomorrow morning. Take the tin with you." "What?" "Tell him Miss Vale intends to go public with its contents. See what he does. That's bait, Wolfe." He allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Of course it is. And we are fishing." Miranda left shortly after, still unsettled, but resolute. I locked the tin in Wolfe's safe, not because I thought anyone would come for it, but because Wolfe was a creature of exacting precautions. I didn't argue. When he's in that particular mood-low energy, high focus, it's best to stay out of the way. The next morning dawned with slate-colored skies and a mood to match. I got to Vale, Linney, and Keats a little after 10. Gareth was alone in his office again, looking more rumpled than usual. He waved me in without a word and gestured for me to close the door. "I don't suppose this is a courtesy visit," he said, eyeing the tin I set on his desk like it was a live grenade. "Nope," I said. "Just a little heads up. Miranda intends to release the contents publicly." Along with the note, he paled. That wasn't an exaggeration. The color actually drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. "Release them? To the press?" "To whoever listens, police, lawyers, food critics. Doesn't matter." He tried to compose himself, but his hands betrayed him, folded too tightly, fingers twitching. "She can't do that." "She can. And unless someone makes a compelling argument, she will." His jaw worked, but no sound came. I leaned forward. "You know what's in there, Gareth? Maybe not exactly, but close enough to make you sweat. So I'm giving you a chance. Come clean." He looked at me, and for one brief second I saw something flicker in his eyes panic. Then it was gone. "I never touched the tin," he said. "Never read the note. I stayed out of it." "You're knee-deep in it now." "No," he snapped. "Miranda's playing with fire. This will ruin people. Name one who doesn't deserve it." He opened his mouth, closed it again, then said, "Get out." I left him with the tin sitting on the edge of his desk. I had taken Wolfe's replica, not the real one, and Gareth hadn't asked to look inside. Another tick on the suspicion board. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe was already waiting in the office. He was rereading a monograph on European marzipan frauds, which, yes, actually exists. When I gave him the play-by-play, he cracked, I said. Not wide open, but enough. He confirmed our suspicion, Wolfe replied. He knows what Margot concealed, and he fears exposure. I nodded. And he's not the only one. Just then Saul called in. He was concise as ever. Movement. On Darnell, he said. She met with a man in his 60s. Tweed jacket, beard, English accent. They exchanged a file folder. She called him Henry. Got a last name? No, but I got a license plate. Running it now. I relayed the intel. Wolfe nodded slowly. We are nearing the axis. The ledger exists. The buyers exist. And the threat still hangs. He leaned forward, eyes sharp now. Have Fred continue. Shadowing Harwell. Saul will pursue the bearded man. Archie, you will prepare invitations. Tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock. All three Darnell, Harwell, and Vale will come here. Another office showdown? I asked. Wolfe's lips pressed into something like a smile. Yes, it is time we allowed the guilty to reveal themselves, if not with words, then with the fear of them. It's a truth I've come to live by. Nothing sends shivers down a guilty spine like a stiffly worded invitation to Nero Wolfe's office, especially when it arrives by hand, without warning, and mentions nothing except the time, the address, and Wolfe's name at the bottom. By noon, I delivered 3 of them personally, one to Sylvia Darnell's bakery, where she blinked twice, said nothing, and resumed frosting a lemon scone, one to Clay Harwell's uptown apartment, where he answered shirtless and suspicious, and the last to Gareth Vale's law office, where he accepted it with the look of a man rereading his own obituary. Wolfe, meanwhile, spent the afternoon conferring with Saul and Fred by phone, rereading the note from the biscuit tin and inspecting the shortbread like he expected one of the cookies to confess. I know the signs when Wolfe gets quiet and glassy-eyed. He's either mulling over something brilliant or trying to remember what Fritz served for lunch 2 Wednesdays ago. This was the former dot at 7:45 that evening. The stage was set. The chairs had been arranged in the office, just so Wolfe in his throne, me at my desk, and 3 chairs arranged in a loose triangle facing him. The tin sat unopened at the center of the desk, symbolic and ominous. You could have mistaken it for a bomb if you didn't know better. By 8 o'clock, all 3 guests had arrived. Each one 5 minutes early, each one pretending the others didn't exist as I led them in. Sylvia wore a blazer so sharp it could have filed court motions. Gareth had gone for the silk tie version of calm, and Clay Harwell, true to form, came in with a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Wolfe didn't rise, didn't greet them. He let the silence stretch as they seated themselves and tried not to squirm. I have summoned you, he said at last, because I dislike being played. That got their attention. Wolfe's tone was not loud, but it could have cracked marble. A week ago, Miss Miranda Vale received a package, this biscuit tin, with a note in the handwriting of her deceased sister Margot. The note hinted at secrets withheld. The tin contained shortbread made from Margot's original recipe, with lavender oil added, an ingredient she never used, which suggests deliberate alteration. The courier used was untraceable. This was no prank. It was a maneuver. Clay leaned forward. Look, I didn't send anything. I haven't seen that tin since— Silence, Wolfe said sharply. Clay sat back. I know more than I am letting on, Wolfe continued, but less than I intend to by the end of this evening. So I advise each of you to consider your answers carefully. Mr. Vale, what did you do with the contents of Margot's apartment after her death? Gareth cleared his throat. Standard procedure. I catalogued everything. Personal effects were given to Miranda. Business materials went to Sylvia. Did you see this tin at the time? No, he said, too quickly. It wasn't. Have you seen it since? His jaw flexed. No, I assumed it was discarded. You lie, Wolfe said calmly. Gareth flushed. That's a serious accusation. It is, and I do not. Make it lightly. Wolfe turned to Sylvia. Miss Darnell, 3 years ago, your partner died under circumstances some considered suspicious. Her recipe book vanished. You inherited the business. You also, as it happens, arranged a series of private sales of those recipe sales Margot concealed from her sister. Sylvia opened her mouth, then shut it again. Would you like to confirm that now, or shall I allow Saul Panzer to read the names of the buyers he uncovered this afternoon? She swallowed. Yes, she said finally. We sold recipes, quietly. Margot agreed to it at first, but when she tried to back out of one deal, things got ugly. Whose deal? She looked at Clay. He didn't look back. Harwell, she said. Clay raised his hands. That's ridiculous. She gave him the shortbread, Sylvia said, her voice tight. He promised it would just be used in a restaurant, credited to her. Then he turned around and licensed it to a food conglomerate. She was furious. Never, she found out. She told me. Said she'd go public. Expose him and me. Said she was done with the side business. That's when she started spiraling. Drinking. Paranoia. Then she was gone. Wolfe nodded once. Mr. Harwell, he said, I know you received a document yesterday, an envelope. You obtained it from a man connected to Miss Darnell. Clay's smirk wavered. I had a right to know what was being said about me. You had a right to protect yourself, Wolfe corrected. And in doing so, you revealed the depth of your involvement. I stepped forward and placed a second note on the desk beside the tin. This, I said, was recovered from the buyer's records, a list of payments. Clay Harwell received $15,000 from the food group that used Margot's shortbread recipe and a frozen dessert line. Sylvia got 10. Gareth funneled the transaction through an LLC, all of it off the books. Wolfe's voice was like a razor. Margot was betrayed by all of you. When she resisted the exploitation of her work, you manipulated her, isolated her, and whether by action or omission drove her to despair. Now, 3 years later, one of you resurrected the tin to reignite the guilt, perhaps even to warn the others. He looked at each of them in turn. So I ask who sent the tin? Silence. Then Gareth said softly, It was me. Sylvia gasped. Clay let out a bitter laugh. Of course. I found it, Gareth said, while cleaning out storage. I read the note. I remembered what we'd done, what I'd helped cover. I thought maybe this would bring justice, or clarity, or something. I couldn't live with it sitting in a box anymore. Wolfe nodded, almost solemnly. You have accomplished that, he said. Though whether justice or clarity prevails, I cannot say. Gareth stood ashen. I'll face whatever comes, Clay snorted. You're going to turn yourself in? To who? For what? Business dealings? You think anyone will care now? No, Gareth said, but Miranda will. And that's who I failed most. I escorted them all out. Sylvia didn't speak. Clay barked something about lawyers. Gareth just kept walking back in the office. Wolfe leaned back with a sigh. Atonement, he muttered. So rare, and yet never enough. I locked the door behind me. So the case is closed? No, Wolfe said. Only the confession is. He closed his eyes. Dinner, Archie. I believe Fritz has prepared trout. We must eat while justice cools. Dinner that night was trout Meunier, and Wolfe managed 2 helpings despite having just presided over a confession that tied together betrayal, fraud, and something not far off from manslaughter. I sat across from him at the dining table, trying to reconcile the fact that Gareth Vale had walked into our office with a guilty conscience and left it with a moral victory. Wolfe was chewing with uncharacteristic vigor, which usually meant he was either deeply satisfied or deeply disturbed. I was betting on the latter. So, I said, breaking the quiet, do we believe him? Wolfe dabbed at the corner of his mouth with his napkin, set it on his lap, and gave me a look usually reserved for when I confused tarragon with fennel. We believe he sent the 10, he said, because he admitted to it. We believe he discovered it while sorting old belongings because that detail was not challenged. But no, Archie, we do not believe Gareth Vale is the only one responsible for the chain of events that led to Margot Vale's death. I leaned back, so the case isn't as closed as he wants us to think. Precisely. There's a pattern here, a choreography of cruelty. 3 individuals, each acting in their own interest, converged on a single woman's creation, her work, her name, her reputation, and carved pieces of it for themselves. Then, when she resisted, they let her unravel, and then sat back and watched, I said. Wolfe grunted. No, worse, they waited for her to disappear. And when she did, they resumed their lives with only the faintest tremor of consequence, until the 10 resurfaced. And now? Now they are shaken, but not yet undone. The next morning brought fog thick enough to lose a cab in. The brownstone was quiet, except for Fritz muttering in the kitchen and the soft flutter of orchids being watered. Wolfe was back in the plant rooms, but only in body. His mind was still turning over something, and I'd bet my last clean shirt. It had nothing to do with pedal rot at 9 sharp. The phone rang. I picked up. Goodwin. It was Miranda Vale. I wanted to thank you, she said, and Mr. Wolfe, for the truth. You got a version of it? Might be more coming. She hesitated. I spoke to Gareth this morning. He said he's stepping away from the firm. Says he wants to make things right? Sounds noble or performative. I think he means it. I don't know, but it matters to me that he admitted it. I was quiet a moment. You sound better. I feel better, not healed, but lighter. Good. Stay available. This might not be over. She promised she would. I hung up and walked back to the plant rooms. Wolfe was trimming a paphiopedilum, delicately removing a withered leaf. Miranda called, I said. She's in a reflective mood. Understandable. Grief given a direction will often mimic relief. I tilted my head. You're still unsettled. Yes, because something remains unaccounted for. He didn't elaborate, which meant I had to prod. The ledger? No, that was real and accounted for. The payments, the buyers, even the forged licensing, those are facts we can document. Then, what's left? Wolfe turned to face me. The lavender. I blinked. The lavender? Yes, a simple detail. The addition of lavender oil to Margot's original recipe. Why? Symbolism? A message? Perhaps. But Gareth Vale did not bake the biscuits. He said he found the tin, read the note, and sent it. The biscuits were already inside. That means someone else prepared them. I frowned. Could be Miranda. Could be a baker. Could be, Wolfe echoed, but unlikely. Whoever baked them had access to Margot's exact recipe. Not just a copy, but the method. The texture, as Miss Darnell described, was hers alone. And Margot didn't leave copies? Not. Unless they were among the items Gareth claims were missing. I let that hang for a second, then said, so someone had Margot's trust. Or her kitchen, Wolfe said. Someone close enough to move through her life unnoticed. That afternoon I decided to take a detour to a place I hadn't been yet, Margot Vale's old apartment. It had been rented out since her death, but I still had contacts in property management, and one of them owed me a favor. An hour later, I was standing in the fourth-floor walk-up in the West Village where Margot had lived and possibly died. The new tenant let me in with suspicion, but no resistance. She was a graphic designer and had already repainted the place twice, but she said some of Margot's things had been stored in the basement until recently left behind. Apparently forgotten dot in the corner of the basement storage unit, amid stacked paint cans and an unplugged lamp. I found a box. Inside were several recipe cards, faded and curled, a small notebook with Margot's initials, and at the very bottom a small dropper bottle labeled Lavandula angustifolia, culinary oil. I stared at it. Lavender oil. Not the kind you buy off the shelf, but the culinary-grade kind Margot had used in exactly one experimental batch. According to her notes in the margin dot, it wasn't a message dot, it was a signature. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe took the bottle from me like it was a sacred text. She baked them, he said softly. Margot, before she died. I nodded. Yeah, and she sealed them in the tin, with the note. Wolfe looked up. That note wasn't meant to accuse. It was meant to warn, or to protect. I said what we were both thinking. She knew they'd come after her, and she left this behind, a final word. Not for them, for Miranda. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. She was cornered, betrayed, but she left behind truth in the only form she trusted, her own hand and her own work. I sat down. So Gareth sent the tin, but Margot packed it. And she made sure it would resurface. Yes, and now? Now, Wolfe said, they must live with it. I looked at the tin, still gleaming on the desk, and for once I didn't crack a joke. Some messages don't need PUNCHLINES dot. By the time the sun set that evening, the biscuit tin had taken on the aura of something more than metal and memory. It sat there on Wolfe's desk like an artifact, silent but loud with implication. I'd seen evidence in a dozen forms guns, scarves, forged letters, broken glasses, but none had felt quite so dot purposeful. Margot Vale had left us a riddle baked in flour and butter, and it had taken the better part of a week to learn it was also a legacy. Wolfe hadn't moved from his chair in hours. He was in what I call monastery mode, motionless, eyes half-lidded, lips pursed, like a monk meditating on the finer sins of mankind. I, on the other hand, was pacing with a glass of seltzer and the vague sense we'd missed something. "Let's say we've accounted for everything," I offered. The ledger existed, the money changed hands, the betrayal happened, and Margot figured it all out before she died. She baked the biscuits, wrote the note, packed the tin, and stashed it somewhere. She hoped someone would eventually find. Wolfe didn't respond. Gareth found it, got guilty, and sent it to Miranda. The others squirmed, cracked, and now everyone knows who sold her out. What's left? He opened his eyes. What's left, he said, is why she waited. That stopped me. Waited? Yes, she wrote the note. She prepared the tin. But she did not deliver it. She hid it. Because she feared retaliation? Possibly. Or she feared disbelief. Or perhaps she wasn't finished. He gestured toward the tin, almost absently. She wanted it found after her death. But not immediately. She wanted it to resurface when it would have the most impact. That requires timing and confidence, and an understanding of who would care enough to follow the trail. "Miranda," I said. "Exactly." But it didn't go to Miranda directly. It went to Gareth, then to Miranda. Wolfe closed his eyes again. And Gareth claims he found it while sorting through storage. An ambiguous phrase. Perhaps too ambiguous. You think he didn't find it by accident. I think, Wolfe said, that Margot left instructions. That idea stuck with me all evening. Instructions. A final act of control. Margot Vale might have been cornered, but she wasn't passive. She was a woman who measured ingredients to the gram, who tested recipes until they sang. She wouldn't have left her final message to chance. The next morning I paid another visit to the storage unit in her old building. I told the super I'd dropped something during my last visit, which was just plausible enough for him to hand over the keys again. I went straight back to the corner where I'd found the tin's box and pulled everything out, one piece at a time. It took 15 minutes to find it. A small envelope taped beneath the lid of a wooden recipe file, too light to make noise and too flat to notice without digging. Inside was a single sheet of paper-lined, handwritten in blue ink. To Gareth, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I'm sorry, but you know what happened. You know what they did. You can make it right. The tin has the truth. Give it to Miranda. Don't protect them. Protect me, Mum. I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I folded it carefully and slipped it into my jacket. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe took the letter from me without a word. He read it once, slowly, then again. When he looked up, I saw no triumph in his expression. Just wait, finality. She chose him, he said. She knew he was weak, but decent. And she believed he would eventually do the right thing. She wasn't wrong, no, but neither was she entirely right. He leaned back and sighed. She should have sent the letter directly. To Miranda, to the police, to someone stronger. But she couldn't. Why not? Because she still loved them. Or feared them, or both. We were quiet for a moment. Then Wolfe said, "Bring her here." Miranda? Yes. It is time she heard it all. From me. She arrived just after 6, still dressed for work but with eyes that suggested she hadn't focused on anything since the night of the confrontation. I led her into the office. Wolfe rose in act reserved for final moves and handed her the letter. She read it slowly. Then again, as Wolfe had. When she looked up, she was crying. "She wrote this?" she whispered. "Yes," Wolfe said gently. She trusted Gareth, and she hoped he would do what she could not. You were her contingency, her conscience. Miranda sat down without being asked. "I wanted to hate them," she said. "All of them? But now?" "But now," Wolfe said, "you must decide what to do with what you know." She nodded. "The company still uses her recipes. Sylvia's brand is built on them. And Clay Harwell profits from the licensing." Wolfe added, "Yes, but Gareth's stepping down. He's offered to donate his share of the estate's residual value to a culinary arts program in her name." I glanced at Wolfe. He said nothing. "And you?" I asked. "I want to start over. Maybe create something of my own? Not just be the sister of the woman who—" She stopped herself. "I want to carry her name forward, not her shadow." Wolfe gave a single nod of approval. "That's as close to paternal encouragement as you get from him." "Then we have done what we set out to do," he said. "You may go, Miss Vale. You are free." She stood, and for a moment I thought she might try to hug him. But she caught herself, nodded, and left with the letter in her coat pocket and a steadiness in her step that hadn't been there before. When the door closed, Wolfe looked at me. "Well?" "Hell of a case," I said. "No murder, just malice and memory." "Yes," Wolfe murmured. "And the faint scent of lavender," I smiled. "And justice?" He picked up the tin, held it for a moment, and set it back down. "As close as we ever get, Archie. As close as we ever get." The next morning, the sun made a half-hearted appearance over West 35th Street, casting long gold slats across Wolfe's office floor like a reluctant curtain call. I was at my desk, thumbing through a news digest, when Fritz appeared with Wolfe's breakfast tray, 2 soft-boiled eggs, a toasted crumpet, and a look that said he'd prefer to be anywhere else than dealing with a client who might call before 11. Wolfe, having risen precisely 8 minutes earlier, was already back at his desk with a cloth napkin tucked like a royal decree into the collar of his robe. I gave him until he was halfway through the first egg before speaking. "So," I said, setting the paper down, "we've got one more knot left to untangle." He didn't lift his eyes. "The press?" "Exactly. You've got Gareth ready to fall on his sword, Miranda poised to reclaim her sister's legacy, and the other 2 circling their reputations like buzzards guarding meat. Sooner or later, someone's going to run to the press with their version of the story. Would you prefer it be us?" Wolfe reached for the crumpet. "Phewie, the press is a blunt instrument, unfit for nuanced justice, but perfect for consequences." He sighed. "Yes, you may proceed within reason," which is how, by noon, I found myself seated across from Millicent Brewster, a feature writer with the Gazette and one of the few people in town who can ask pointed questions without drawing blood. I gave her just enough: the betrayal, the off-book deals, the tin that told the truth, and left the names vague. I knew she'd sniff them out, but that wasn't my job. My job was to shape the story. "You're saying the woman who died left evidence?" she asked. "She left justice and a cookie tin." Millicent blinked, then grinned. You really work for Wolfe. Guilty. The story ran 2 days later under the title, The Shortbread Confession, a Recipe for Betrayal. It was elegant, well-sourced, and as Wolfe grudgingly admitted, not entirely appalling. By the time the ink dried, Darnell's Bakery had issued a temporary closure for reevaluation. Clay Harwell had lawyered up and gone silent, and Gareth Vale had released a public statement confirming his resignation from the family firm. For personal reasons. The piece didn't name Margot Vale as a martyr, but it came close. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was once again at peace, or at least as peaceful as he ever gets. The orchids were responding to his attention again. Fritz had resumed baking, and I was back to keeping his calendar and chasing the occasional unpaid invoice. Things were, in short, normal until a letter arrived. It came in a cream-colored envelope with no return address, and Wolfe's name printed in dark green ink. That alone was enough to earn it a raised eyebrow. I opened it under his watchful gaze, and handed him the single page it contained. He read it once, said nothing. I waited. Finally he passed it to me. Double quotes, Mr. Wolfe. You don't know me. But I knew Margot Vale, not well, but well enough. She sold me one of her lesser recipes under a handshake agreement. I never used it, but I kept it. She asked me to. I thought you should know she planned more than you guessed. That tin wasn't her only message, just the first, H. I set the letter down slowly. Is that a threat? I asked. No, Wolfe said. It's a promise. I didn't get it at first. You think there's more? There is always more, Archie. The question is whether it's still buried or waiting to surface. I picked up the envelope and gave it another look. Postmarked in Brooklyn. No fingerprints I could see. Should I track it? No, let it be. He stood, which meant something had shifted. Margot Vale was a woman betrayed by those closest to her, yet she maintained an astonishing degree of foresight. She prepared a narrative beyond the grave. That is rare. Macabre, too, only to the unimaginative. I leaned on the edge of my desk. So if there's more, and someone else holds another piece of the puzzle, what then? Do we keep digging? No, Wolfe said. We wait for the next message. Over the next week, things settled into a rhythm again. There were no more letters, no more clients clutching tins of baked goods, no urgent calls from Saul or Fred. Even the orchids seemed less dramatic. Wolfe resumed his twice-daily plant sessions, and I managed to meet Lily Rowan for 2 consecutive dinners, something I hadn't done since the case of the cinnamon envelope. But there was one final visit that changed the tune. It came from Miranda Vale. She rang the bell at 10:01, a mod time that told me she'd learned Wolfe's rules and waited patiently while Fritz let her in. I met her in the hall and led her to the office, where Wolfe was sipping his first beer of the day and rereading the decline and fall of practically everything. Miss Vale, he said, unexpected. I won't stay long, she said. But I wanted you to have something. She reached into her bag and placed a small parcel on the desk. Brown paper, tied with a black ribbon. I looked at her. Another mystery? A conclusion? Wolfe untied the ribbon and opened the parcel. Inside was a plain manila folder. Inside that, 3 pages of handwritten notes in Margot Vale's hand. She must have left them in a storage box I'd overlooked, Miranda said. I found them 2 nights ago. Wolfe read them silently. I peered over his shoulder. They were recipes, but not just recipes, annotations, changes, footnotes on flavor and memory. At the bottom of one page, a line for Miranda. You always understood the taste of truth. Wolfe didn't look up. Miranda stood quietly for a moment, then said, She wanted me to do something with it. I will. I believe you, Wolfe said simply. She nodded, smiled, and turned to leave. After she was gone, I poured Wolfe a second beer and said, So what's that make this now? Justice, legacy, or redemption? He took the glass. All three, he said. And perhaps a fourth. I waited. Continuity? That was Wolfe, always planting ideas like orchids, in soil. Only he understood. I raised my glass to the biscuit tin still sitting on the corner of his desk. Now just a tin again. To Margot Vale, I said, and the truth she baked in. Wolfe didn't raise his, but he didn't object. The day after Miranda's final visit, the rain came down in sheets. Not the dramatic, thunderous kind that splits the sky, but the steady, soaking kind that turns the city to soup and makes even taxis drive like they're walking on eggshells. Inside the brownstone, it was warm, dry, and quiet, the way Wolfe preferred it, especially after a case. The kind of stillness that smells like old books, slow-roasting garlic, and orchids that have recently been scolded into blooming. I was at my desk with a pencil, and Wolfe's expense ledger making sure Gareth Vale's final check was logged, deposited, and balanced when the man himself called. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, his voice as tight as a drum. But I wanted you to know I've arranged for the remainder of Margot's unpublished recipes to be turned over. To Miranda. Publicly? I asked. Yes, officially and permanently. She'll own the intellectual rights and decide how to share them. That's a good move, Gareth. I didn't do it for points. Good, I said, because you're not getting any. He gave a dry chuckle. Wolfe was right. Guilt doesn't go away, but sometimes it points in the right direction. After I hung up, I passed along the news to Wolfe, who was in his office chair, one ankle resting on the opposite knee, looking for all the world like a man ready to nap through the remainder of human civilization. He said. Then, the recipe returns to its rightful hands. That is something. Redemption? He shook his head. Restitution. Rare enough. I'll take it. Saul Panzer called next, confirming that Clay Harwell had quietly closed the shell company tied to the shortbread licensing deal and had retreated to Connecticut with his fourth wife and, presumably, a top-shelf bottle of scotch. The scandal hadn't made headlines, but it had done the job. He was persona non grata in half a dozen professional circles now, and if you squinted just right, that looked a lot like Justice Dot. As for Sylvia Darnell, Saul reported that her bakery would reopen soon under a new name, minus her share of the Biscuit Sisters branding. Word was she'd quietly bought out her silent partners, streamlined her operations, and was planning to release a line of baked goods dedicated to honest ingredients. I was half tempted to check if that included a new shortbread. I didn't. Ask Wolfe if he cared. I already knew. We spent the next few days in the comforting pattern of non-crisis life, Fritz's menus, Wilf's orchid lectures, my half-hearted attempts at bookkeeping. I even cleaned out the file drawer labeled Misguided Bakery Disputes, which was, until now, blissfully empty. Then, on the following Thursday, I found Wolfe in the plant rooms talking to the orchids in the tone he usually reserves for new clients' board. Tolerance edged with contempt. I didn't interrupt. I waited until he returned to the office, poured himself a glass of beer, and settled in. "Anything else outstanding?" I asked. He took a sip. "Just one thing." I raised an eyebrow. "Do tell." He turned in his chair and looked at the tin still sitting on the bookshelf, though no longer the centerpiece of the desk. "Why, lavender," he said. I blinked. "We covered that. Margot used it once in a trial batch, right? Signature, symbolic, poetic, all that." "No, I mean, why did she choose lavender for the message? Not just to identify herself. To say something?" I had no answer. Wolfe didn't wait for one. She wanted to be remembered by something beautiful. Subtle, unexpected. That's what lavender is, an aromatic flourish added when bitterness isn't wanted. Even if the truth was bitter, especially then. We were quiet for a while. The rain tapped at the windows like a slow metronome. Wolfe reached for the notebook Miranda had left behind, flipped it open, and reread the final line. "You always understood the taste of truth." He tapped the page with one finger. "There, Archie. That's the essence of it." "What is?" "Justice," he said. "It isn't vengeance or exposure. It's the correct flavor, delivered at the right time." I couldn't help it. I laughed. "So what, we're gourmet detectives now?" "Don't be flippant." "Me?" I gestured to myself. "Never." He grunted and closed the notebook. "I'm filing this case under closed and complicated," I said. "Label it how you like. It's done. Then we're overdue for something simple. Blackmail, perhaps. A stolen painting. Anything that doesn't require me to compare spice jars and family dysfunction." He didn't respond. He rarely does when I'm being cute. Instead, he stood and shuffled toward the kitchen. He was overdue for his second lunch. Fritz would be expecting him. At the door, Wolfe paused. "Archie." "Yeah?" He turned his head slightly, just enough to see me out of the corner of his eye. "When I die? Oh, come on. I expect you to place nothing in a biscuit tin. Not a note, not a lock of hair, not a single damn crumb." I grinned. "Just a label marked, 'Handle with intellectual caution.'" He actually smirked. "That would be acceptable." And with that he disappeared into the hallway, the scent of beef stock already drifting in from the kitchen. I leaned back in my chair, looked at the dark red tin on the shelf, and thought about Margot Vale, about what she lost, what she salvaged, and what she managed to say when everyone else thought her voice had vanished. Wolfe always said that the most profound statements are made without spectacle, that justice, when true, is rarely loud, just deliberate, and final. That's what the biscuit tin had been, a quiet verdict, a closing argument made of butter, ink, and resolve. The kind of case you don't forget, and I didn't. The week after, the storm passed. The biscuit tin was gone. Not missing, just relocated. We've had Fritz box it up and send it to Miranda Vale with a simple note. The truth belongs to those who endure it. No signature, no flourish. Just 12 words and a little silence. And that, as far as Wolfe was concerned, was the end of it. We didn't get a thank you card. We didn't expect one. Miranda had taken the recipes, the notebook, and whatever was left of her sister's fractured legacy, and begun shaping something new. She hadn't said what exactly, but I had a guess. She was starting a bakery. The real kind. Not just pastries, but restoration. Margot's name would be printed on boxes again, this time above board and uncompromised. It wouldn't change the past, but it would say something about how the future could taste. Wolfe, of course, returned to his orchids with the unflappable devotion of a monk who's finally resolved the last of his sins. His routine resumed with such flawless rigidity that I almost believed none of it had touched him, almost, but I'd seen the way he lingered with the recipe notebook before he packed it, the way he had read Margot's final line 3 times before setting it down. You always understood the taste of truth. He never said it aloud, but I knew what it meant to him. That even in death, Margot Vale had upheld Wolfe's sacred principle, clarity. Not theatrical justice, not courtroom spectacle, just clarity. In her own time, in her own voice. A few days later, Kramer dropped by. He didn't bother calling first, he never does. Just showed up, hat in hand, looking like someone who'd just chewed a lemon whole. This the place where justice is baked and served with lavender on top? He asked. I let him in. Wolfe didn't stand, but he did set down his beer, which is the closest he comes to a welcome mat. Kramer plopped into the red chair with all the grace of a safe being lowered onto carpet. You cracked it. Huh? He said. The Vale business. Wolfe shrugged. There was no crime to charge. Still, Kramer grunted. 3 reputations dismantled, 1 woman vindicated, and a biscuit tin making the rounds like the Ark of the Covenant. I'd call that something. You would, Wolfe said dryly. Hell, you even got a quote in the Gazette. Kramer jabbed a thumb toward the folded newspaper under his arm. That's got your fingerprints all over it. Wolfe grimaced. That was Mr. Goodwin's doing. Kramer turned to me. Remind me to revoke your press badge. I smiled. You don't issue those, Kramer. Then I'll improvise. Wolfe folded his hands. Do you have a purpose, Inspector? Kramer sighed. Yeah, to say, that woman Margot, Vale, she was smarter than any of the people who tried to cheat her. And maybe if someone had listened sooner, she wouldn't have been lost in the first place. People don't listen, Wolfe said. Not until the damage is irreversible. Yeah, Kramer muttered and stood. That's the damn tragedy, isn't it? When he left, Wolfe didn't comment. He rarely does after Kramer visits. I think he finds it refreshing to be spoken to like a peer, even if it's by a man who perpetually looks like he just swallowed a stapler. Later that evening, Wolfe and I settled into the quiet. The house felt fuller than usual, though no one else was there. Just the residual presence of truth well expressed, and justice not done perfectly, but done right. I poured myself a glass of rye and leaned against the bookcase. You know, I said, it's been a while since we had a case without a corpse. Refreshing, isn't it? Wolfe replied, Sure, but don't expect it to become a habit. I don't, he said. People are impulsive, foolish. They hoard secrets until they sour. Eventually, someone always dies for it. That's grim. That's life. I took a sip. You think Margot knew exactly what would happen? I think, Wolfe said, she knew what might happen. And that's what mattered. Sending the tin, trusting Gareth, leaving the note. He nodded. It was her final strategy. And it worked. I looked at him. You ever consider what you'd leave behind? He turned his head slowly, that familiar half-glare, ready to pounce. Archie, if I wanted to communicate after death, I'd arrange for a brass plaque, not a biscuit. Not even a recipe for your favorite duck rillettes? I trust you've already memorized it, I grinned. I have. He picked up his beer and settled deeper into the chair. The light from the desk lamp caught the edge of the now empty space. Where the biscuit tin used to sit, the case was over. No killer to cuff. No courtroom to fill. Just the story of a woman who'd been betrayed and still managed to speak, clearly enough for us to hear her. I raised my glass again just once, to the air dot, to Margot Vale, to justice that doesn't need a gavel, and to truth with the faintest hint of lavender. Archie Goodwin.